Greetings, you happily miserable accursed. Herle here with another edition of your goddamn favorite political pod. And yet another week where 2/3 of our panel will have to do. Professor Scott Reid is here, back from his intensive week beguiling young minds at Queen's University. Kory Teneycke is here, consistent, ever-present, always perspicacious. Kory. But alas, Jordan Leichnitz is not here this week. She's off doing Jordan Leichnitz things, which probably involves doing some Friedrich Ebert stiff-tongue things. But good news, you accursed, you don't have to go a week without Jordan Insights. If you head over to airquotesmedia.com, she's written a fantastic piece on the far-reaching ripple effects of the PSAC strike. Take a few minutes and give it a read. All right, today, the Alberta election, UCP New Democrats still running neck and neck, wildfire crisis going on in the province, lots of campaigning in Calgary going on. We'll review that. We're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into the Michael Chong China CISA story. There's a new king of Canada, so we'll talk about the coronation if we can. And does wake up beat out woke? Our cursed clipping is Alex Ballingall's piece from the Star on Trudeau taking direct aim at Poilievre at the Liberal Convention. We'll recap all the salient stuff from the weekend, and then the wondrous Mr. Gordon Pinsent will ask us for our hey yous. Scott, what was teaching like?
It was pretty intimidating. Pretty stimulating. So for folks who don't know, I went down to Queen's MPA 881. I want to give a shout out to all of the students. And there were a few poisoned, perverted, twisted minds who were fans of the podcast. So that was kind of exciting to see. And it was a great experience. It was fun. I mean, but it was really intense. It's this course that you take a course in 1 week. So I'm there as a rookie, and I would teach from 9 to 1. And then people would break and students would come in and talk to me over the lunch hour. And then I would break, and then or 9 to 12. And then I would do another 3 hours from 1 to 4. And I managed to recruit
a couple. That's 6 solid hours of work, eh? Jesus.
It's a lot of time for people to listen to me. And wow. So there were many people, learning how to thread a noose, mix poisons they could drink. So, but we got through it. It was pretty fun. It was a very intense experience. I now know how
mix
not
a
to do
Coke
it.
While driving.
Yeah, absolutely. David, you were obviously a guest. I had a couple of guests. Our buddy Dennis Matthews came down, did a stint on advertising. Shannon Proudfoot from the Globe came in and talked about what it's like to cover government and the Prime Minister. So it was fun. It was a lot of fun. I really liked it, but it was really tiring. And at night, I would just go sit in some pub and I would scramble to write the next day's lecture, pretending that it was already prepared. And I would drink beer and watch a playoff game. And it was a crazy, weird experience. But shout out to the students. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Yeah, sounds like a cool thing to do. You know what happened to me this weekend? I got completely fucking dunked on by Commander Chris Hadfield.
Outstanding.
No way.
Yeah. He was a speaker at something called the OG 100, Ontario Growth 100 conference down in Niagara. And he gives this very impressive presentation on space and what's happened and what he did and his life story and his journey. It's all very compelling. And then there's a question and answer session. And I'm being an asshole and I stand up. And I say, you seem like an intelligent and reasonable man. Why do you prefer Space Oddity to Rocket Man? And he says, because Rocket Man is the story of what it's like to be a gay man performing in America in the 1970s. And Space Oddity is about space.
Well, he's not wrong. Awesome. And you just said, thank you very much for your reply. It sat down sheepishly.
Totally, absolutely. Yeah.
100%. I met Chris Hadfield, for years and years before they rebranded. I did Canada AM like multiple times a week, and I would always meet incredible people in the green room. And he was on one day, I was on, and he gave me one of his guitar picks, right? He's like, this is a guitar pick that I played the guitar on in space. So the kids have that. And my son Ben loves to play guitar. So that's and my son Will, so they have that. So that's pretty cool. I assume he just has a crate of them in his trunk that have never been to space. They're not from space, right? They're from like Whitby or whatever. But
Well, they would have been in space. I'm pretty sure they're not from space, unless something really special went on up there that we didn't know about. But, I don't have anything of importance to note from the weekend, but I do got to throw a shout out to all our fans and stuff out there, because I did spend a little bit of time hanging out on the margins of the Liberal convention with you, Mr. Herle. I got as close as the Chateau Laurier bar, and
that's right in the middle of it, really.
And got to have a really nice lunch with you and chat, and for all of our fans and podcast listeners out there, if you're ever feeling a little bit down or anything, sit down for lunch with David Herle, because he laughs and makes you laugh, and is even better company off the podcast, hanging out doing all that. And we had, I don't know how many people came up and chatted with us, but we had a preacher who went to school with Ray Novak.
We have a minister that listens to the pod.
Yeah, we have a minister. We had a former Conservative MP from Winnipeg. A whole bunch of people who were, really, really generous to come up and chat, and it reminded me just how lucky I am to be a part of all of this, because it was great fun meeting those folks and hearing all of that.
Oh, Scott, people were thrilled to meet Kory too. It's really
no
fun.
Kidding.
Really fun that way. But I introduced Kory to Bruce Young, and I don't know that Kory's going to be the same.
Yeah,
awesome. You start talking about British politicians putting oranges up their ass or something like that. That's the Bruce Young I love. Right into it, right off the top.
It's great. I don't know how we've never met, but we've never met because we're 1 degree of separation from a whole bunch of close friends. And but it was wonderful. So another added plus of hanging out with you, David.
There we go. Well, let's get to the convention, and let's start with a little bit of a quote from Alex Ballingall's piece. Speaking on stage before hundreds of Liberal supporters, Trudeau ran through a litany of accusations and attacks on Poilievre as he tried to fire up his partisan base for the next federal election. Describing how Canada faces an amalgam of challenges, from climate change to global instability and rising costs of living, Trudeau charged that Poilievre's Conservatives aren't up to the task of facing it. At the same time, the Prime Minister accused Poilievre of parroting gun lobbyists. He condemned him for allowing Conservative MPs to meet with a German far-right politician, and he decried Poilievre's show of support for protesters who took part in the so-called Freedom Convoy occupation that, quote, blockaded our streets and borders for weeks last year. At the same time, the Prime Minister Trudeau also hearkened back to his previous statements that despite their differences, Conservative Canadians are our neighbours and should be treated as such. But he accused Poilievre of failing to understand the value of thriving communities, in part because of his criticism of the government's multi-billion-dollar subsidies to bring a Volkswagen electric vehicle battery factory to southwestern Ontario. In this consequential moment, Trudeau said it would be the honour of his life to lead the party through the next election, his latest confirmation that he intends to stay in the job through the next campaign. Kory, you were there, soaking in some of the atmosphere. What was your take? What did the Liberals get out of this convention, and particularly out of that speech?
I think it's firing them up a little bit. And, and anyone who hasn't been a listener to the podcast and is unaware of our views on this, Trudeau is running again. and at this point, you would have to be deaf, dumb, and blind to not see that. Like, that speech, that tone, that approach it's beating you over the head with that clear message. Look, I thought he got some of his speech right. I think he's gotten some of the messaging right. But as we chatted about yesterday as well, David, I think both of these leaders are making a mistake and being the primary spear thrower for their party and their message. And neither Poilievre nor Trudeau are very popular. In fact, they're both very fucking divisive, polarizing, and problematic from that perspective. But the approach they're taking, I think, is a reach for the bottom, not a reach for the top sort of plan. You can't be going out and being the presentation of the harshest attack lines on your opponents and have people like you. Nobody likes the guy who's negative all the time. Nobody likes the guy who's shitting on the other guy all the time. And frankly, they're both doing it. I was listening to Michael Chong, before we went on QP. The very stately, calm, low key tone, very, sort of substantive in its approach. That's sort of what the leader's supposed to be doing, and the lieutenants, like the Chongs of the world, should be the ones who are out there with like a bushel basket full of hand grenades, throwing them around. And it's kind of the opposite, which is weird, and you saw the same thing from the stage of the Liberal conference. Trudeau was more fired up, more adversarial, throwing bigger spears than any of the cabinet ministers that I saw, and that's just odd in my view.
Scott, what's your take?
Well, unlike you guys, unfortunately, because I was in Kingston playing Professor Snape, I didn't get a chance to be there. But I thought a couple things from afar. I mean, first of all, I just want to underscore, having been one of the comms monkeys that has to sit in a room with a warm case of beer and draft one of these speeches, I just want to acknowledge they're hard to draft, especially when you're an incumbent prime minister, right? Because you want to rally the crew, and the prime minister has a natural impulse to what Kory is saying. They have a natural impulse to give that 4,000 Liberal delegates or 3,000 or whatever the heck it is, to give them red meat, to give them good, hard, partisan content.
But Scott, if I could just say, my sense of that room was that the delegates, they love Trudeau, but they're worried the country doesn't love Trudeau.
Right.
And they didn't want to hear more of what they love about Trudeau. I think they wanted desperately to hear a winning path.
Right. Well, let me...
Sure, but you could give them a pass on that, don't you think, guys? Like, if it was a convention, but that the article that you were quoting was the first speech he gave when he got back from the coronation. Like it's a continuance. So like I don't know. I'll be interested to see where they go. I don't want to overstate it on what you do at a political convention as being the be all and end all of this stuff. Let's see what happens over the coming weeks. But if that continues, the point that you've made before, guys, where are the ads? It doesn't even have to be a minister.
Let me just pick up on that, particularly on what you said, David, because prior to the convention, when people would ask me what needs to happen, I said two things. One, Trudeau's got to settle any question with respect to his future and make it clear I'm running and that's that. And two, he should explain why he's running, right? And that, to me, David, it's not just because Pierre Poilievre is a prick. It's because this is our pathway forward. This is the unfinished business. This is what gets me out of bed. This is what ought to get you as Liberals out of bed. This is what's going to excite us. And this is what, by the way, we happen to think is appealing to the country and is both important and hopefully appealing. And I didn't think that it obviously met the minimum test of I'm running and I mean it. So that's good. And that crowd wants to hear that. And he obviously gave them lots of reasons to, run against Poilievre. And it was okay, I would say, on that front. I like the, hey, what do you mean woke? Wake up here. I like that line. That's a good line for that crowd. Okay. So 10 out of 10 that in that setting, you got to give them a couple of those. And I thought that was a good one. I thought brokenism was very ungoodism as political branding. It's just it's
rolls
weird
off the
and
tongue.
it doesn't roll off the tongue, and it's so forced and lame, and it's so like, hey, and somebody was like, I got a good one, and it's like, you don't have a good one, okay? Like, you're fired. You're out of the writer's room. Get the fuck out of here. You're not funny. You're not interesting, and you don't know how to command the English language. So scrap that. That's done. But the path, as you say, wasn't there. And then I thought the rest of the convention, it's clear that it served as core function. Like, Liberals seem to be kind of united and comfortable and all that kind of stuff, and they were happy to be together and
they're united, but they're scared.
Yeah, and so there wasn't a lot of, well, what's the path forward? What's the unfinished business? How's that help us get reelected? And why is that exciting? And I thought the rest of the convention felt like felt like a little rear view mirror, right? And I know I'm being a dink, but I just, between Chrétien and Hillary Clinton, it didn't feel very 2025. It felt awfully 1998. And those people will get they're going to get fan love out of the crowd, and that's good. But it at minimum needed to be coupled with more. And I thought the speech needed to be coupled with more. And when it comes to Kory's point, I couldn't agree with you more. They haven't figured out what the rhythm is yet. On the PM, on the one hand, telling you that his strategy, his speech literally says, our strategy is that we're going to run on our positive vision for the future, just like I said in 2015, yada, yada, yada. This is our positive vision. We get big things done. We have the right values. But then he spends the whole speech being his own hatchet man. And they've got to figure this thing out. They've got to figure out how to maximize the high negatives of Poilievre, how to make him unelectable, because that's really the path to re-election, but without making Trudeau the guy that carries that. And I think it's ads and a designated hitter, like we've said for almost 2 years now.
Going into the 2014 election, I wanted to run some negative against the NDP and against Hudak, particularly the NDP, because their numbers were too high. And Kathleen didn't really like it. And then she said, if I'm prepared to have those things said, why aren't I prepared to say them themselves? Wouldn't it be myself? Wouldn't it be more credible if I said these things myself? And so, frankly, in a bit of an effort to humor her, we recorded the ads. We shot the ads with her walking and taking apart the NDP in one ad and taking apart the Conservatives in another. And the clear evidence of the ads was that they made people feel more negatively about her than they did about either Horwath or Hudak, right? Because they didn't like the fact that she was doing that. They didn't like that version of her.
I think I remember looking at those ads. I think Jill showed me a rough cut of those ads at that bar, Wellington, near you. Yeah. And I remember looking at those at the time, and you're like, instantly, like, this doesn't scan, man. Mm-hmm. They need an assassin, not the prince to say those words. And I think Trudeau's doing the same thing.
He does. I don't think he needs an assassin per se. Like, I think it's actually more, it's not the leader has to say these things. Literally everyone except the leader has to be saying it. Like, literally everyone. It's not one spear thrower. It's, hey, everybody in caucus. Hey, everyone in cabinet. Here are our lines.
Jolie did that, by the way, Kory, in her introduction of Trudeau. Jolie did that.
Yeah. But where is that? You just don't see it. You see a lot of statesmen out there doing their thing, and maybe it sounds like I was complimenting Michael Chong earlier and talking about his tone, but it actually is a bit of implied criticism there.
Absolutely,
it should be the opposite.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be Poilievre on this particular issue out there, with the flamethrower. It should be Chong saying, that's my family. Yes. And could actually summon, moral outrage and indignation. Instead, it's like, he could have been with you, Professor Reid, teaching a public policy course, but with all of the emotional detachment and, sort of lack of passionate thrust. And then you've got Pierre out there, literally with a flamethrower, going at it, and version of same with the Liberal government. For all my conservative friends out there, if you want to be a cabinet minister, you better start acting like a politician first.
You regular listeners know I'm a son of rural Canada, Prelate, Saskatchewan. Today's population somewhere around 116. But like so many before us and many more after, my parents moved the Herle clan to Regina for better education, better healthcare, and more opportunity. Today, because of digital connectivity, these opportunities can come to Prelate and all rural and Indigenous communities. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, has been proving it for years now, working to bring the digital tools and infrastructure these communities need to thrive, so families can access online education, work, healthcare, and other services, and stay in the places that are so much a part of who they are. But this is no gauzy, romantic story about how digital access can preserve small-town values, hurly-burlyites. It is a value story, an economic one. According to StatsCan, the mobile telco industry contributed $25.5 billion to our GDP in 2020. In 2019, it was 1.2% of total GDP. Capital expenditure in wired and wireless telecommunications was over $10 billion in 2020, or roughly $260 a Canadian. And get this, the industry is responsible for creating an estimated 145,700 jobs. Any way you cut those numbers, it's an immense contribution to our economy. The recent Auditor General's report on the status of rural connectivity has made it abundantly clear that connectivity is a driver of economic growth for all communities in Canada, urban, rural, and remote, and that we all need access to affordable, high-speed internet and mobile to participate in the digital economy. TELUS, to borrow a phrase, is so down with that. They want to up the ante, work with governments to meet and even exceed their target of 100% connectivity by 2030. Never more important than now during this critical time of economic rebuilding. Go to telus.com/rural to learn more. Hey, Kory, what do you think about Scott's Point? You've put together the odd convention or so. The guest speakers, what do you think that was going on in the planning of this convention? I understand that Hillary only came together like a week or so ago with a personal call from Chrystia Freeland to come.
If I were them, I would have made several personal calls to have her not appear. Like,
Is that strategy though, or your own bias talking? No.
Well, let me explain why. It's not because I, have some personal animus against Hillary Clinton. Look, she's just fine. But look, a sunrise and a sunset look a lot the same. They both can be very beautiful, but they're not the fucking same thing, right? And Hillary Clinton is not a sunrise. Hillary Clinton is a sunset. You're running for your fourth fucking term of office. You're going to your party convention trying to show, hey, we got some life and we got some gumption and we're trying to put issues around leadership and who's going to lead the team, behind us. So why do you get, 3-day-old fish and put it on the menu and call it the special of the day, right? Like it's, maybe the fresh fish on the menu or at least the freshest you have, but it's not very fresh.
I really
it can't
agree
just
with
be
that,
greatest
Scott, do you?
hits. Pardon me?
I really agree with that. Do you?
I strongly agree with that because it can't just be the greatest hits. You also need to know, if you're programming the convention, you definitely want greatest hits. Okay, so you want the greatest hits out there knocking away and making the crowd come to their feet and dance around. But you also want the rising star. You also want next year's Grammy winner. And so just to use the U.S. analogy, if you're going to draw somebody from the States, you're going to call into that area code. Call Pete Buttigieg. You know what I mean?
I was literally going to say the same name. Yeah.
That's. And again, you don't have to say don't come Hillary, but you do need to say, if that's all it is, then you say, am I busy being born? Am I busy looking backward? And and it just, so to me, they needed more of that. And look, it worked. Let's not overanalyze it. The thing worked. It made people feel comfortable. Trudeau's laid to rest the question of whether or not he's going to run again. People assume he's running again, and that's that. So we'll move on from that story. But what we did not see was the clearly traced out lines of how they're going to beat Poilievre.
Well, I thought that, I don't want to, not say anything positive about it because I think there were some things in that speech that I thought were on target. I thought he was creating a narrative for female voters that I thought was compelling.
Mentioned choice at least 4 times in the speech.
And that is wise, and it will drive the conservatives crazy. And in the chattering classes, we'll say it's so obvious, but just keep banging that drum for sure.
Well, it's not just the choice stuff. It's the 50% of cabinet being female. These things are all, cruise missiles straight to those voters. And I thought that part of the speech was good. I thought the stuff around VW was good as well. I thought the stuff around, tipping the hat to people in the building trades, I thought that was smart because, I think there's always an element, both for the conservatives and the liberals, frankly. It's too bad Jordan isn't here. They're the only ones who sort of can naturally hit the tone right when talking to organized labor, especially on the building trades, where they don't look like either they're, fancy pants is looking down their nose, or the monopoly man with his top hat and his monocle. The latter being the conservatives and the former the liberals. So I thought like those things were all smart. It's just I thought the VW stuff should have been point one and 3 or 4 points in the speech, and they got to flesh that out more. We talked about that a bit yesterday as well. Like I think there needs to be something more, but it's the start of something good. And the stuff around talking to organized union folks who are all at risk to go to the Conservatives this next election. He's got to take that bullet point, and I don't know whether he has to change it much, but it's got to be in every speech, and I suspect it's only going to be in that speech, and I think that's a miss.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the aforementioned Mr. Chong. Scott, there has been no evidence really to date that this Chinese interference story has been having any political impact. I've seen no impact in the polls that could be remotely traced to this ongoing story that's been occurring for months now. So it doesn't really seem to be either captivating Canadians or having a partisan impact on Canadians. Is this the issue? Is this the development, the Chong thing, that changes that? Because it seems different in character and nature.
I mean, it does, but I don't think it will serve that function. It seems different in nature because it takes it from an abstract concern of geopolitics and, my God, what's our government doing, and something that exists in political columns to something that seems human and relatable, like holy smokes, like this person and who's like 5'10", and I can look at them on a screen and realize that their family is, they have reason to believe their family's in danger. So it makes it more graphic and more real, but I'm not convinced that it's actually translating into an issue where people are going to say, this is causing me to do something different, certainly going to cause me to vote differently in the next election. But it is obviously chewing up this government, and it's symptomatic of a couple of things, right? Like, first of all, it's very, like, the internal, and, we've all been in government, and you all deal with the, well, how the fuck can it be that, criticism, right? And so it's how the fuck can it be that CSIS would know this and tell somebody at PCO, and it goes to the National Security Advisor, but the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister to know. It's Poilievre's intuitive line, which is a good line, therefore, politically, to say, which is like, are you lying and covering it up, or did you not know and you're incompetent? So you have to soldier through that unpleasantness. And so, one implication is that if the government has to get through the next 2 years of governing before it has to face the electorate as an incumbent government with all the warts and bruises and all that, like, it needs the government to be better at being government. And so, and I don't mean them, I mean all of the whole apparatus. It can't be an ongoing, persistent vulnerability. And like, when I look at how, Marco makes an announcement last week with respect to the gun buyback program, and immediately the organization to whom he's turned to conduct the buyback program says, we don't support the policy. Right? How in the flying fuck could his department permit that to occur? Like, Christ. Right? And then you've got this situation. It's like, so what are the protocols? So on and on and on. And every government of every partisan ilk.
But how are they still being, I'm mistaken, but how are they still being fucking surprised by developments in this case? Like, how is it possible that months ago they didn't get every fucking thing on the table so they knew what they were dealing with?
Right, and I agree with that. So last thing I would say is it just keeps them away from
security agencies.
Exactly.
Like, it's like dealing with D&D, at least my experience in comms, D&D is probably a better example because I had more comms things around them. But, you never know what's coming out of there.
Yeah.
It's a black hole. It's a void. But, okay, take all of that and say, there's not a lot that you can do. You can go and, clear somebody's desk off and yell at the director of CSIS and all that. And at the end of it, I would say you have a 1 in 4 chance that you're going to get the truth when you ask a question to them. You're asking for something that's not going to actually happen in all probability. What is inexcusable to me is not that. It is, why is that fucking diplomat still in Canada? It's that.
Well, Kory, are we in a situation now? Are we in a situation now where we can't expel a diplomat who did that? Because we're worried that China will just arbitrarily pick up 3 Canadians and throw them in jail?
I assume that's what's going on, isn't it?
Well, but it's so weak. It's so weak. It's such a misread of how you deal with a bully and all of, and that part of it they own. And as for Marco, he's a very nice guy in my limited experience of dealing with him. But I got to say, politically, Don Martin isn't wrong. This guy's got a reverse Midas touch. Everything he touches turns to shit, seemingly. Like I don't get it. If I were the prime minister, I would be looking at doing a cabinet shuffle one more time before the next election. Try to lock things down. And there's some weak players in very hot, critical files right now. And I'll talk about it a little more when we get to our hey yous. But there's another really nice guy who's the transportation minister who's just not up to the task. So, you've got some very difficult portfolios and issues, and they're dropping the ball. So, you can give them a pass, at least I do, on some of the what do you know and why don't they know all of the facts on these things. But you can't give them a pass on not throwing this guy out and their response.
Marco seems like a guy who's trying to read cryptic instructions and follow them. Rather than doing what he thinks is the right thing to do.
He looks like me trying to put my password into my Crave account on my TV, one letter at a time last night because it somehow got deleted. Like really, really incompetent. Like, and bumbling.
Well, I'm going to come to his defense because he is a good friend, and I think that's too severe an analysis. And the reason I think it's too severe analysis is because I agree with your first point, which is that he's riding her. If you look at what's the common denominator in so many of these files that have been challenging, it's that there is an apparatus below that's obviously letting him down. Now, his part of that
contradicts your earlier point, though, Scott. Your earlier point was, how is it that he puts out a gun buyback program and puts it in the hands of somebody who comes out 10 seconds later and shits on it? That is an unforced error.
Well, that's my point, though. That's my point. Is that so? My comment with respect to, I don't think there's an inherent incompetence in Marco. I think there is a failure to learn the lesson that his own department and apparatus is teaching him over and over and over again, which is that you can't rely on them. You can't rely on them to say, yes, minister, it's all taken care of. These guys are solid. You can't rely on them to be giving you a clear brief. And I don't think so. What do you do in that situation? Here's my political complaint for both Marco and the Prime Minister on a bunch, and it extends to on the Chinese file. I don't think they've been vocal enough in saying to the public, I am unsatisfied and I'm taking action. And I don't think that, they should be indicating, instead of sort of saying, well, this is how come it happened, or this is what had happened, or looking like they can't find their Crave password. I think at minimum, they should be saying to folks, I'm as unsatisfied as you are. And then there's got to be a couple of actions that demonstrate that and that actually resonate with people. So to your point, I don't know that the government has the political, I just don't know that it has a political space as complicated and complex a question as it is dumping the Chinese envoy. I don't know that they have the political choice to not do that now. And so it feels to me like they're going to take time and talk in front of microphones about how complicated it is, and then they're going to do it, at which point they'll get exactly fucking zilch credit for it. And so to me,
because it's not their idea. None of the remedial actions ever their fucking idea. They're forced into it, right? They're back.
Yeah. Well, like reluctantly, but demarching diplomats is something that happens all the time everywhere else in the world, seemingly except here, and it used to happen here. But Germany.
It's still, I don't know. Is that fair? It's pretty uncommon. It's pretty uncommon, and you can do it against pipsqueak countries. But China's another deal.
No, it's not. That's not true, Scott.
Well, you got to be worried about Canadians getting jailed over there.
Okay. So, Germany threw out, what was it, 40 or was it 70? It was a substantial double-digit number of Russian spies and demarched them in the past 6 months. Do we think there are no Russian spies in Canada? Guess what, everyone? Yeah, there are. Right. And they work at the embassy, same as our spies. And, so in real time in other countries, it's happening all the time. This is a major issue. But like no one in China, no one in the Chinese administration is going to respect you.
But if you think, Kory,
going,
work me through it. If you think 2 steps ahead, so you kick out the diplomat, and they will react. They arbitrarily detain 3 people. Then what?
Then you demolish some more. But like, what are you doing? You were saying, what are the boundaries of what's acceptable and not acceptable? You have to, deal with a bully like a bully, and you've got to say, here are some very clear lines of what you can't do. And if one of the red lines is you can't threaten and intimidate
everyone listening understands
members of parliament.
Everyone listening understands what you're saying right now, but you haven't answered David's question, and it's a pretty goddamn consequential question if you're in charge of making this decision, which is, what do I do? What if it's not 3? What if it's 13? And then I don't have a mechanism to get them out, and they're in a fucking prison for how long?
Okay, but
I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying it's not fucking simple to do, and it has real world consequences.
Sure it does. You know what a bigger and more serious and more disturbing real world consequence is that you don't protect your own citizens in your own country. That is, and if they do that, you know what you do? You start canceling visas. And you start throwing out lots of people, and you've got to be willing to up the ante and say where the red lines are. And if a red line is not that you can't threaten and intimidate members of parliament, I don't know what a fucking red line is. Like where is it enough? So you got to do something, and you got to be willing to escalate in some sort of parallel track. And it's not like China is going to go and the next day arrest a bunch of Canadians and throw them in jail again. And if they do, there better be consequences, because the lesson from the 2 Michaels is there aren't consequences. That, unfortunately, is what the lesson was.
Well, another lesson is when they're in prison, it's hard to get them out. And so like I don't disagree with you, but this is not just a kind of like it's not an any asshole policy. It's not any asshole could figure this out. It's they're. So do you send a signal? Do you escalate it now and send out does Foreign Affairs put out a formal dispatch that says, you know what, if you're a Canadian in China, get the fuck out now. Get out by Friday. How do you manage it? That's all. I'm just saying it ain't so simple.
I think you got to not just throw out that diplomat, but that should be, point one. But I think the government has to start talking in real terms about what escalation looks like. What other things are at risk? And, look, if you're going to do this, we're going to do this. And not all of that has to be out in the newspaper, right? You can do this through diplomatic channels too, but there has to be some sign that you're going to do some things, and you got to communicate to the other country what some of those things are, and you got to communicate to the Canadian public that you're on the file and you're showing up in the morning and you're doing something. And because right now I think they're getting both sides of this wrong. They're looking like they don't know what's happening in their own government. And and I think we talked about that, and you can give, I think, a fair amount of latitude and space on that, because I think, it doesn't matter who's in charge, that would be happening. But what I think is different than if someone else was in charge is what the reaction is. And that they can control.
So I want to ask a question. And quite frankly, it's a question most of us should be asking right now. As I've explained here before, the federal government intends to impose a new rule on the country's railways. It's called extended interswitching, and basically it means shippers will be able to force railways to hand off cargo to one another, possibly multiple times, between origin and destination, at the expense of the railways. I've compared it to forcing airlines to deliver passengers to their competitors back and forth on several flights, instead of a direct nonstop. This will, without question, slow down cargo. Our sponsor, CN, reckons it may delay shipping times by up to 25%. And it will cost all the railways money, a lot of money. Such costs are inevitably passed on to consumers, and that's just the way the economy works. So, just to be clear, the government intends to impose rules that will needlessly clog our domestic supply chains and increase sticker shock for consumers at a time when Canadians are already struggling with sharp increases in the price of groceries, fuel, and most other items on the store shelves. My question is simple. Why? Why is the government determined to do this? It's been tried before and it didn't work. And who exactly benefits? because someone will definitely benefit. The last time this pilot was tried, it was an American railway that benefited most. I suspect that didn't create any jobs in Canada. More on this in the weeks to come. Meanwhile, think about it. Everything you buy, and I mean everything, travels by rail at some stage. CN, for one, does not want to see supply chain efficiency deteriorate, investment in Canadian infrastructure deteriorate, and needless price increases. Do you? Ian Brody's on the record as saying, by the way, that it would axiomatically have come to him as chief of staff to Harper if there had been such a piece of intelligence available.
Well, and you know, I love Ian, and you know, but what is that statement? That's a statement of how things would have operated quite some time ago with a completely different crew of people in charge of CSIS. But even then, I'd say I'd give it a 1 in 2 chance that that's the case. But you know, maybe. But you know, it's a different director, it's a different team of people, both in PCO and at CSIS. And you know, there's a pattern here, and we've seen it on a number of issues. We go through the convoy if we wanted, or many other things, where you know. The secrecy in the CSIS seems to be about keeping secrets from the elected people in government that are supposed to be supplying intelligence information to, as much as it is keeping secrets from, you know, the broader public.
Well, you have another whip hand in government, and it's not sexy, and it isn't terribly visible, and it won't get a lot of attention on our podcast, and that is demote deputies. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's also that sort of discipline that you can exercise.
Sure.
You can say, listen, I see evidence of inadequate judgment, and sort of saying to people, well, it's not acceptable, and throwing people around and saying sorry. Like, I mean, this actually does have a career limiting consequence. And right. And that's the dissatisfaction. I don't hear and feel and see a level of unsatisfaction. Well, maybe I'm missing it because I'm not there, but I'd like to see some evidence.
We've seen it on other files. Like if you were to look at you know, the handling of sexual misconduct within the Canadian Forces. And non-compliance and all of that, you saw that happen, and many, right? Like,
but jeepers, it took it to that level before that occurred, right? Well, and
I'm not going to say who it was, but a senior member of the government had such a good line on that with DND that I just have to repeat it. It's like, I've never opened a deck of cards, and everyone I turn up as a joker in terms of trying to find somebody to lead the Canadian Forces that you know, wasn't up to no good at some point in the past.
Yeah. All right. Hey, there's a new king of Canada.
Yeah.
Coronation on the weekend. I didn't watch it. I don't give a fuck. Either of you guys got anything?
I actually watched it. Yeah, not in real time because I don't get up at 4 a.m. on the weekend. You know, you'll be surprised to hear. But
still up, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But no, I watched the rebroadcast, and you know, look, because I think this is a consequential moment in our history, and you know, this is something that doesn't, you know, hasn't happened in a very long time, and you know, I thought it was interesting to watch and all of that. The problem is, you know, Charles is a well-known commodity, and not all the things that are known are really great. And you know, a lot more people have watched The Crown in Canada than watched the coronation, and it's not so flattering. And you know, I think the institution is there's a lot that you could say that's really positive about it, and it's part of our legacy. And I think, you know, and I think it's a good feature of our government. Like I think it would be better in the United States if, you know, the Donald Trumps of the world had a head of state that they had to go and pay some level of homage to, and the notion that the state is larger than somebody you elect into office. Like there are a lot of good things that you can say about the monarchy and all of that, but you know, we've gone from, you know, sort of the best case scenario monarch that you could have with Queen Elizabeth II, who was widely respected by, you know, hundreds of millions of people around the world, and had a personal comportment that was, you know, really beyond reproach in many, many, many ways. And now we have somebody who, you know, You don't have to be an ethicist or a moralist to say, you know, there's maybe some challenges around this person, and you know, look, I'm a human. You know, if I were in that kind of position, there'd be a lot of
You're trying
barbs
to tell me
thrown
that
at
you've never wanted to be a tampon?
Yeah, right. But it's I don't know how to respond to that, David. No, I haven't. But
Let's just be glad no one's tapped your phone calls, Herle.
Or mine. But look, you know, we're not the head of state. But the comparison is not going to be made to you know, dirtbags like you and I, Scott. They're going to be made to Queen Elizabeth II, who you know, has lived a bit of a better life in that regard than we have.
I mean, I just happen to think, Scott, that the institution makes so little sense in this year that, I mean, whatever, there was some residual affection and affinity to the Queen. And I think that has largely dissipated with her absence. And I don't think that most Canadians are going to care at all about the monarchy, but I think it will survive because there's no alternative that isn't incredibly painful for Canada to get to from here. So I think just inertia will keep them in place, but without any real relationship at all.
I have a different view. I think, and my view on this has changed. My view personally and my view in terms of what I think from a political risk management and a political recommendation standpoint has traditionally been. So personally, I grew up in Prince Edward Hastings. Like my Aunt Marg was the most important person in my life after my mother. And on her wall hanged a portrait of the Queen. So like this is where I come from. So a place of ubiquitous attachment to these, like I had an uncle who signed his name UEL, United Empire Loyalist. Okay, so that's where I come from culturally and familial, right? So not inclined to be a monarchy basher, but like as I watch this stuff, the transition from the Queen, you know, it isn't just Charles. I hear what you're saying, and I think you're right, Kory, but I don't think it's fair to heap it just on him. I think the institution in the full color, high definition broadcast of 2023.
When I saw the carriage, Scott, it just looked ridiculous.
It doesn't make sense. I just don't think it does. He's standing there and he's sitting there rather. They hand him the scepters. They've got the crown on his head. And I say, this looks silly. This looks ridiculous. This looks like this looks like a deleted scene from an Amazon series of some, you know, like it doesn't. And so that's my personal view, is that I think this institution is not just disconnected from people's daily lives increasingly in this country, but I think it looks anachronistic and weird to people and almost alienating. And I don't think that you can be indifferent to that. And so where that takes me politically is I used to share your view, David. I was always of the view when people would raise this issue, I would say the pain of trying to deal with it. Yeah. Danilo, you know, great story about Danilo and Lawrence Martin in a headline sometime. I won't go into it now, but Peter having to answer for an anti-monarchist impulse one day. But like, from my perspective, I'm not sure the political risk argument holds water anymore. In fact, I wonder if there's a political opportunity. So, for example, say you had a prime minister who was running to try to win his fourth election in a row, who had begun as a symbol of dynamism and reform, and who seemed like he had a big slice of youth going for him, and now is struggling to recapture that sense of fresh and energy. I'm not certain that I wouldn't be tempted, if I was that prime minister, say, in this next election, we're going to attach a referendum question, and we're going to poll Canadians at the ballot box on whether they would like to continue to be a part of the monarchy, and we all sign allegiance to the king, or if we say we will keep this constitutional structure, but we will replace the king with a president or whatever our head of state is. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Right.
And go that way and just sort of see, and then have that argument and let that argument unfold. And I think that it will make, you know, from a partisan perspective, when you lay it over, I think there'll be there'll be some, the cohort that would be most offended by that probably is heavily inclined to vote conservative anyway. I think there could be some energy and sense of, oh, okay, well, this is changed. Now, maybe it's not, it's
I think that's a fine
change.
idea, Scott, but I think if you open up the Constitution right now, it could be the end of the country.
I understand that
between Quebec's plans and Indigenous plans, etc., it could literally be the end of the country.
I don't know, man. I think you say, I'm not doing that. I refuse to open the Constitution. Other than this.
You can't change the head of the state and our, the fundamental constitutional democracy that we have here without changing the Constitution, Scott.
Well, I know, but say we're not going to permit this. It's a one-time. I'm having a referendum so that there's a one-time agenda item. That's all that any of us have a mandate to do, and we will acknowledge you will. And if it gets a 2/3 supermajority, well, then we're moving. And all of the first ministers should feel bound by it, and they should speak up now. And if they say they're not going to be bound by it, or that they want to include other items, I say no, and you oughta. And see how that debate unfolds. And if you lose that debate, fine. But I think it puts you on the right side of like, are you for this strangely, this 1953 newsreel? Well, the King Charles today was holding the scepter of scone or whatever to Christ.
Scott,
I don't think people.
Scott, even if you're a hardcore, Republican, and I know, and I'm
not actually, but
but I know many of them who are. Say if that was my point of view, I think it's very reasonable to say that. If you're going to, bring the country into that, and that's the thing you're going to hold a referendum on, and all those things, that you're wildly out of touch with what's important and what Canadians want you focused on right now. And even if you think you got a point on that, you could say, well, that's a point, but, cost of living, the economy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I'm still going to campaign on those things. Are we so sure? Are we so sure that this thing wouldn't, are we so sure that in 2015, it wasn't like weed was the most important issue to Canadians, but saying, like, I got a point of view on this, and this is what it's going to be.
I would want to do a lot of polling before I got into that fight.
Fair enough. But all I'm saying is I think my assessment as to what the political risks are and where the political opportunities are, I think it's changed. And I think it changed on May 6th. And I think it was changing before then. When Charles and Camilla did their tour last summer of Canada, I was watching the footage then, and I thought, this looks fucking odd, man. This just looks odd.
Sure does. Now, speaking of constitutional talks and who might be difficult in them, it's our time for our weekly update on the Alberta election. And I would have to say, they've got a terrible tragedy going on out there with the wildfires and 30,000 people displaced from their homes and a lot of property damage already, and God knows what's to come. Thank God they got decent weather yesterday. But I would have to say, much to my surprise, Premier Smith appears to be handling this entirely appropriately. She's met with and briefed with Rachel Notley on the situation. She's reached out to the federal government in a professional manner for assistance. She looks like the Premier.
Yep. Yeah, look, David, I think this is a really consequential moment in this election campaign, and I'm going to explain why, and I'm going to give you an example of how we had a similar version of something like this in 2015. The Notley campaign is clearly the ballot questions around leadership and appropriateness to be in charge, and they've set a bar as what that looks like, and they painted a picture of Danielle being absolutely unqualified and a train wreck and a disaster, etc. That she can't help but jump over, because like many of our fellow accursed who are listening to this, I like watching news conferences and stuff. I watched her news conference around this. She was good, and she certainly wasn't the train wreck that has been portrayed and that is a part of the NDP advertising, etc. She looked good. So, the example that, I'll give you as point of comparison is the 2015 campaign, where all of our polling and research, probably very much like the polling and research that the Notley team is looking at, said, what is the soft underbelly of Justin Trudeau? Well, he's, the guy who's, suave and debonair and charming, and he's not a serious person, and he won't have a command of issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Even, one, seemingly incompetent comms guy even went out and said that if he, just showed up at the debate and had his pants on, that everyone would say he wins. So whoever that fucker is, I hope he got fired. But
I remember that. You got your metaphor all mixed up, though, didn't you? You got into like whether his pants were up or down, his zipper, and his dick was out. It was all weird. It came out wrong.
Absolutely. But the point being, you can focus on all the research can say. Focus on this. This is the thing. But sometimes life in the universe gives you an opportunity to demonstrate that the image that you're setting up of this person, the narrative that you're trying to craft and tell, it doesn't work. And for Trudeau, where he overcame that was his performance in the debates. It's not like he beat Harper in any of those debates. Harper was great, but Harper had to be great and was expected to be great. All that Trudeau had to do is be adequate and not the sort of stereotype that was presented. And all of a sudden, he's passed the test and crossed that threshold. What I think is happening with this issue so far, and it's not all played out yet, but Smith's comportment and her comms and how she's presenting herself and how she's appearing, I think to folks is that she can be trusted to make good decisions and act in a responsible manner in a crisis, and that deeply undermines the NDP narrative. And what nobody thinks whoever's in charge can stop a forest fire, or not have to go through that. But how you handle it is really, I think, undermining the narrative that the NDP have. It's very bad luck for them that I think that this is happening. It's bad luck, obviously, on a substantive basis for anyone whose house or home is at risk and has had to evacuate, et cetera. But, the opportunity here for Smith, I think she's making the most of. And I think it's going to be a material point in this campaign.
Scott, I'm just going to pile on with what Kory said because I have an additional observation, which is that as I watch the NDP campaign, they're not playing an aggressive offensive game. They're playing defense, it looks to me, and waiting for Smith to fuck up. Like they're not trying to be the sharp edge of the campaign. For instance, they haven't really even taken a position on the Calgary arena, even though Leger polling shows that it plays just like I thought it would in Calgary. Only 16% of Calgarians strongly support the government money going into that arena. But yet, nonetheless, the NDP don't oppose it. I think so. It looks to me like their campaign strategy was Smith is going to be Smith at some point, and we just have to sit back and be innocuous and let that happen. And then this wildfire thing comes along.
Yeah.
Isn't there? Sorry, you go ahead, Scott. I was just going to jump in on the.
Well, I was going to go to a slightly different place because there's not. I don't know that. I mean, first of all, we sound like heinous, soulless cretins because we're looking at this solely through the prism of what are the electoral impacts. Obviously, there's a genuine tragedy and natural disaster happening, and real people are.
I said that at the beginning. Fuck off if you're going to try to call me a bad person.
I just want people to know how bad a person David is in particular. But I think the interesting, it sidelines the NDP campaign. It shortens the election campaign. These are the real world consequences. If I'm running the election campaign and I'm looking at this right now for the NDP, I'm like, holy crow. So then you ask yourself, well, let's assume this is going to eat up. And I don't know what the answer to this is. 3 more days, 5 more days? I don't know. But it's going to leave me with, today it's 3 weeks, right? As of the time of this recording, I think, right? It's 3 weeks today, the election will be held. So let's assume for the sake of discussion, just to make it harder on yourself, I have 2 weeks to redefine the election campaign. And this has been a fortifying event for the premier where she's able to look like she's in charge and she hasn't fallen over her own feet on this issue. And I think, from my perspective, what do you do? And I think one of the lessons is that, you can't make it about this abstract notion of leadership. And so then you've got to say, well, what are my best 2 issues on the board? Let's go to issues. And I think you got to go after in Calgary. You got to go after that. You got to break some eggs to make an omelet. You got to go after that arena thing and go hard on it in the most populist, simplistic way. This is rich people getting rich.
It's not just rich people. It's a rich person. And,
exactly.
I have no bone to pick with Murray Edwards, but
but he doesn't need $400 million of provincial government money. He just doesn't.
But that's what you say, and it's a chance to demonstrate what your priorities are and say,
big time.
I love the Calgary Flames. I want to. You can say all of those things about that and say, we need hospitals. We've got big issues going on. We have all of that, and leadership's about making choices. And my choice is not to give hundreds of millions of dollars to a billionaire.
Well, and you actually you kind of previewed what I was going to say.
You know what Leger found? As you also might expect, Scott, Leger found that almost 70% of Calgary voters thought this was an attempt to buy their vote.
Right.
Okay. So
I would transparently for what it was.
I'd say all of that stuff, and I would do exactly what I think Kory did by impulse, just as he was rattling it off. And I think I would make it explicit, and I would link it to healthcare, and I would link it to healthcare and hospitals, and I would go after that issue with an axe and just try to say, like, if we can get to election day where people say, well, if I vote for the NDP, I will get more healthcare. Like, I know that much. That's the conclusion I've reached to. If you can, in addition to that, persuade them that she's in some way, Smith, a danger on that front. But I don't think you can run on this sort of abstract, you just can't trust her. She doesn't, it's the raccoons argument. I don't think you can do the family and raccoons campaign. You're not going to have time. It hasn't worked. It's too vulnerable to events, as this has shown. And you got to go after something. So to me, the interesting question now is, how do you play your cards? Is there a way to win this campaign?
Let me throw one more thing in here, Scott, to the mix, Kory, which is that the same Leger poll showed that a number of policies that Danielle Smith has been closely associated with, like the CP, like having an Alberta-only pension plan, are wildly unpopular. And she now says, I'm not going to talk about these things in the campaign. She literally said that, right? Yeah. That's not my platform for this election. That's not what I'm running on in this campaign. Well, hold on a second. Don't you have to draw those things back into the play as well if you're the NDP?
Those are the two issues I go at. I'd link the arena, and I would go after healthcare and CPP, healthcare and pensions, and just, see if you can make it.
They've got to make it a referendum on something, and I actually think the arena issue is probably the best one out there for the NDP right now. It's kind of like, if you hearken back to poor John Tory's race and religious schooling, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
It went, that campaign basically became a referendum on that one issue, which is a very minor issue in the grand scheme of things. But it was, it became largely a referendum around one issue, which spoke to priorities and, all of those things. And you can actually do a lot of damage with something like that. I'm sure that, Murray Edwards has probably, put tens of millions of his own money into various endeavors. I don't know what they are, but I would not be surprised if,
what some of them are.
I would not be surprised if there is an Edwards wing on the Foothills Hospital where, $30 or $40 million went into. Like, that wouldn't surprise me. I don't know what there is and isn't, but I would go around and look at all of those things, and I do a little tally that says this is how much that is, and I do how much money the state just gave him for his hockey team. Say, thanks for your generosity. Thanks for $100 million, and we just gave you 400. Like, it's
for a team that's worth over $1 billion to play hockey in. Right.
Well, look. What are sports teams? You guys are more sports guys than I are, but these are the play toys of billionaires. Whether it's NFL teams or whether it's hockey teams. I was around the Quebec world when my old boss Pierre-Carl Pelleteau was trying to get the Nordiques back, and going around and meeting with all the other billionaire hockey team owners to try to get their support for buying a team. These are playthings of not just the wealthy, the uber fucking wealthy. These are the most exclusive private clubs that you can belong to. And, and people understand that. And so, giving a bunch of money to those folks, there's a reason why it pulls like shit, and always has, because it's shit. It's shit policy, and people see through it, and they don't like it, and they don't want it. It doesn't matter how big a hockey fan you are. You don't want to see a billionaire get hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money for their play toy.
100%. All right. Mr. Pinsent, would you please bring this to a conclusion?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right, who's got a hey you?
I do. I'm going to start. And I'm going to start by going back to my goddamn issue, which you guys don't like, about the crown. And I'm going to say this. Here's a micro issue on the crown. Yesterday, I assume, thinking that the sequencing should be in the aftermath, it's an echo announcement of the official coronation. The government of Canada indicated that the $20 bill will be changing, directing the Bank of Canada and the Mint to put Charles on the 20. In many ways, to confirm that that would be the case. I think that was a stupid political decision. And it's another example of how when you've been in government for a long time, you sort of move your way through a bunch of briefing notes. You go, okay, well, this is kind of the natural expectation. And the PM's, we need a package of stuff in and around the coronation. PM's going to go here, he's going to do that, all kind of stuff. And then the day after, we'll announce this. Somebody should have said, you know what? Why don't we just fucking wait and see how these strange dress-up pictures play on the television and with people? Why don't we see if people go, wait a goddamn minute? Because I can think of a lot of people that I would put on the $20 bill ahead of Charles, and I think that most people think like me, not like this press release. And I just think like it's just an indication somebody did this by reflex, and somebody should be like, they have got to get a lot more mercenary in their political impulse. And so, I'd almost be inclined if I were them to say, you know what, we're actually going to we're going to rethink that thing. But definitely the decision to just put it out as a matter of rote, to me, fuck, man, that's bad. That's bad game. Get your game better.
Excellent. Kory?
Okay, well, mine is going to be a hey you with some advice. For the PMO, for the Prime Minister, hey you to those folks. You gotta start putting some of these issues that are grinding away on you behind you, and there's things you can control and don't, and things that are more complicated. We talked about expelling diplomats, all of that. Here's one that I don't think is very complicated and would be very smart. It's time to put the Trudeau Foundation behind you. And I think there's a very magnanimous thing that they could do that I think would get a lot of support from a lot of Canadians and a lot of people. And that's to say, we're going to rebrand and reconstitute what is the Trudeau Foundation, which is doing, on all accounts, good work in terms of providing scholarships to people, and say, you know what, it's now going to be the Prime Minister's Foundation. And it's going to be the people who are going to be on this board are going to be former prime ministers from every party, and other people who are qualified to be a part of that. And say, this is going to be something that can unite Canadians. And
Christ, in 3 years, Harp will be the only person on the board.
Yeah, right. Well, I would like that. He's a really nice guy. No, but look, the notion, in all seriousness, the notion of doing something like the Trudeau Foundation, I think, was ill-conceived from its start. It's very un-Canadian. We don't do that with former prime ministers historically in Canada. That's not something that is part of our political culture the way it is in the United States. And I think it would be smart politics. I think it would be good policy, and I think it would be unifying for Canadians to walk away from that branding and that approach, and say, you know what, this is going to be in the name of all prime ministers, or you could have it in the name of whatever the fuck else you want. But, let's abandon that notion that we're going to do this really good thing, but in the name of one prime minister from one party, and we're going to stack a board with, cronies and hacks and, friends and fellow travelers and sons of and all the rest to, dole this money out. We're going to do that in the name of all Canadians, because it's frankly, at the end of the day, all Canadians' money, and do something like that and put that issue behind you. I think I hope someone out there is listening to that. It's the advice is worth what you paid for it, but I think it's something that would be smart for them and good for the country.
When I watched his brother's testimony last week, I didn't get the impression that Justin's well-being was Sacha's top priority. No, I can't imagine that was, I thought it was very ill-conceived, and he did not have to be there. In fact, the committee said they weren't going to call him, and he insisted, essentially, not great. No. I have two hey yous. I got a mini one and a big one. My mini one goes out to whoever in the Liberal Party decided to stop serving alcohol in the Laurier Club lounge at the convention. It was an extremely unpopular decision by my interaction with delegates throughout the convention site, because the people that contribute to the Laurier Club, the old poobahs, they like to go and sit in that room and visit with their own kind and drink. And there was no alcohol at a Liberal convention. My God, what has changed?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Thank Christ I didn't go. That would have been awful.
My big hey you goes out to Marc Lalonde. The news came to me yesterday that Marc Lalonde had passed away. And he's, of course, one of the giant figures of politics in the 60s and 70s and 80s in Canada. He was Mr. Trudeau's go-to person for every important file, is still beloved in the social policy community for the 1974 health white paper that he put out that the government did not implement, but nonetheless was quite revolutionary in its thinking. It was a big part of history. It was a big fight between him and Turner, big showdown over that policy. And in any event, I got to work with him when I was a very young kid in the summers of 1983 and 84. And I've rarely in my life been more chuffed than when I walked into that office and got a business card and said I worked for the Honorable Marc Lalonde, because he was the fucking champ of that government. And then we had a falling out. We had a bad personal falling out over Turner, because Mr. Lalonde opposed Mr. Turner's leadership in 1986 at the review, and he and I had a public break, and we didn't talk for a long, long time. And then in advance of the 2006 election, I sucked up all of my pride and went and visited him along with John Webster, and we asked him if he would be the Quebec co-chair of the campaign. And after making me eat some shit for a few minutes, he graciously agreed and worked his ass off at it. So I got to work alongside him in somewhat of a peer capacity, which was also a big thrill for me. Great loss to Canada, and I'm very, very sorry to hear about it. But boy, big part of my life, Marc Lalonde. Rest in peace.
I don't have any personal stories to share. I mean, I only met him a handful of times, but he was somebody that, as a nerd kid interested in politics, fascinated me, because he was this angular looking, severe sounding man. And yet he was obviously a dominant figure in politics. And then he starts out as a principal secretary in 1968, then becomes a member of parliament. And then after that, as soon as he's in cabinet, he is at every single hot file, plus he becomes the Quebec lieutenant as René Lévesque becomes premier and separatism blows up on the government and appears as though it might even be a fait accompli or an absolute irreversible course of action. I mean, just astonishing. And I'll just add that. I mean, and then the opportunity to meet and work a little bit alongside him, in the 2000s was quite staggering. But just that, the epitome of that sort of uncharismatic, cerebral, I don't have to ask for power. I don't have to tell people I'm powerful. When I walk into the room and you're in my orbit, the fucking power flows off of me. So back up, because I'm a genuine superhero.
Hey, Kory, he was running the Quebec campaigns, and in 79, they won 67 out of 75 seats. So when the election happened 9 months later, he figured that wasn't good enough. They won 74 out of 75 seats.
Amazing.
All right. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail. Everybody who watched or listened to the show today, Kory and Scott for being here, and Jordan, come back next week. It's lively when you're here. And everybody else, take care. We'll see you next Monday with more Curse of Politics. Enjoy yourselves.